Good afternoon, everyone. We're going to get started in a few minutes. I just want to give people, okay, thank you all for joining us this afternoon for the Fairfax Cryobank webinar covering sperm donor screening and testing. We're going to get started. For those of you who've joined us before, you'll recognize my voice. I am Michelle Oddie. I am the Laboratory Director and Director of Operations for the Cryobank. Going to be joined by Christy Burke, our amazing Assistant Director of Client Services for the Q&A session. She'll be able to answer any of your questions related to orders. And moderating those questions is Morgan Barker, our Senior Marketing Manager, who is putting all of these webinars together for you all. So again, welcome, and I am excited to share this information with you all today. The goals for today are to present an overview of the donor screening process, present our infectious disease testing, go over the genetic disease testing, give you an overview of the ongoing testing and screening, and then to provide a significant chunk of time for the question and answer period, because we've gotten some feedback that you all would like a little bit more time for that section of the webinar. As we're going through the webinars and presenting the information and questions come up, please do type them into the question section on the sidebar, and we will get to as many questions as possible. So before we jump into the meat of the webinar, I'd like to know how familiar you all are with the donor screening process. So if you could just answer the poll on your screen, let us know if you're a beginner, moderate understanding, or if you think you're an expert on the screening process. Give you all a few minutes to answer that. Great. Okay, great. It looks like about 70% of you are beginners, so this is the perfect webinar for you, and the rest of the group has a moderate understanding. So for those of you who already know some of this information, hopefully you'll submit some good questions to help the beginners out. So to get started, just an overview, we do donor recruitment. We are recruiting for healthy men ages 18 to 39 through online, print, and radio ads. The majority of our active donors are actually 21 to 29 years old, about 65% of them. 20% of our active donors are married and 20% have children of their own. I can tell you that through experience, I've been with the Cryobank for 14 years now. Over the years, we've done different surveys. We always ask the prospective donors and donors, what their motivation was. And we hear a lot that about, I think it's 45% of our applicants and donors indicate that they have some experience with people in their lives who've experienced either medical or social infertility. We hear a lot, oh, my sister and her wife used a sperm donor to get pregnant, or my cousin had trouble conceiving and they had to use a sperm donor. So we do get a lot of really positive feedback about the altruistic motives, and we do also hear that the compensation is part of why guys will apply as well. We have 6 locations in the United States. It really helps us to recruit for a more diverse donor pool because we're drawing from 6 different cities. Once the donors are recruited, they go through the screening and approval process. This is just a quick graphic to give you an overview. There's the initial online application, the medical application. We do semen sample screening, and then all of the infectious and genetic disease testing and screening. And I'm going to go through this process for you so that you all have a better understanding of what goes into the screening process. Initially, the applicants will go to the application online and they complete an initial suitability and eligibility questionnaire. If everything looks good there, they go through an extensive health questionnaire where they have to self-report 3 to 4 generations of medical history. It's themselves, their parents, and then their grandparents' generation. We say up to 4 generations because we do have applicants who have their own children, so they're also reporting on their children's medical history. It also asks various lifestyle questions, which could be indicators of semen quality. For example, healthy eating, exercise, alcohol consumption, smoking, things like that that will contribute to the semen quality. We want to get indicators of that in this questionnaire. If everything on that questionnaire looks pretty good based on the suitability guidelines that our medical director determines, we will invite the prospective donors in to screen 3 to 4 semen samples over a 2 to 4 week period. The reason we do multiple samples is that we have to do the semen evaluation because we want to ensure that they're providing a high quality sample. We're looking for men with higher than average sperm counts, better motility, because as you can imagine, cryopreservation, freezing of human cells is a pretty violent process for the sperm. Water, as you know, crystallizes, and those crystals can break cell membranes. And so we have to test for the survivability of the sperm sample by processing it, adding a freeze media with a cryoprotectant called glycerol that replaces some of that water, that helps to protect the cells from that ice crystallization and damage. So 1, we're looking for high quality samples. 2, we're testing for the survivability of the samples. And 3, we want to see consistency in the sample production, which is why we look at multiple samples over multiple weeks. We want to make sure that the guy can come in with a certain number of abstinence hours that will lead to a good sample that we'll be able to freeze for a really high quality sample that will come to you as the recipient. And this is just an image of a high-powered field that would be used to determine motility. The boxes, the grid is used to count boxes, and we do a count of at least 5 high-powered fields in duplicate for up to 200 cells, for a minimum of 200 cells. So we're looking for really high quality, good modal sperm samples. If everything looks good there, we have a donor review committee, the DRC. It consists of the medical director, who is Dr. Harvey Stern. He is a board certified pediatric geneticist. Myself, the lab director, my background is in genetics, and I've been with the company, as I mentioned, for 14 years. We also have the laboratories manager, who is Shantae Nichols. She's been with the company as long as I have and has great experience. One of our incredible genetic counselors, Suzanne Seitz, who adds her genetic experience as well. And we have the director of client services, Cheryl Doblenberger, on the committee. And basically this group is looking at each donor applicant and reviewing the information to decide if we want to proceed with screening. So that long form medical application is first reviewed with a staff member on site. So the staff will sit down and do an interview with the donor applicant and basically go through and verbally have them confirm the information in their medical application and dig a little bit deeper, get additional information. So that medical application comes to us. We have all of that semen sample data. And just as an aside, I should have mentioned on that previous slide, the semen samples that we use for the screening process are only kept to do a post-thaw evaluation to determine how the samples will survive, and then they're discarded. Those are not kept or saleable because we haven't done any infectious testing on those yet. So at this point, we have no vials in storage for these guys. They're just still being screened. So back to this slide, we have, as I mentioned, the medical application, the semen sample data. We have photos that we use internally for photo match, the face match, and for our medical director to visualize, be able to visualize each of the donors. We do a criminal background check on each of the applicants and a psychological evaluation. The psych eval that we use is the personality assessment inventory. This is a psych eval that's used by mental health practitioners to determine or look for indications of psychopathologies, anything from depression and anxiety through schizophrenia or bipolar disorder, or personality disorders. So once we have all of that information, the packet comes to the donor review committee, and we make a recommendation, and then the medical director makes a final call and says, yeah, this is a good candidate for our program, or no, he's not a good candidate for the program, we're going to reject him at this step. If we're going to proceed, the next step is for the donor to schedule a comprehensive physical examination. The physical exam is done the same day as this initial blood draw. And the initial blood draw, I'm going to go into in more detail about the infectious and genetic disease testing that we do. But the physical exam is a really important part of this as well. The cryobank contracts with medical health professionals who complete these comprehensive physical exams after doing a really in-depth training with myself with using information that the medical director and I have put together for them. The purpose of the physical is really to identify the applicant's overall health, but it's also to look for indicators of disease, and it does include FDA-specific screening questions. Along with that physical, the donor then comes into our facility and we do a blood draw and send it off to an FDA-certified infectious testing lab. We do serological testing, which means this is blood drawn that is sent for, in this case, antibody and antigen testing. And all of the tests listed here under the serological side are required tests that we have to do under different regulatory bodies. We're looking for HIV 1 and 2 antibodies, hepatitis B surface antigen and core antibody, hepatitis C antibody, cytomegalovirus antibody, syphilis, or RPR is the acronym that's used there, and then HTLV 1 and 2 antibodies. Along with that, FDA also requires polymerase chain reaction or DNA testing. This is for HIV 1 and 2, and we also do it for HTLV 1 and 2, HCV, and then we're doing chlamydia and gonorrhea testing, CMV NAT testing, which we're the only sperm bank that does the CMV NAT testing. We also do herpes simplex 1 and 2 by NAT, so this is on the actual semen samples, and we do human papillomavirus or HPV 16 and 18, which are 2 strains of HPV which are known causative factors in cervical cancers, and we are the only sperm bank that has these tests on our roster. We are very lucky to be part of the Genetics and IVF Institute, as is our molecular infectious disease testing lab that runs these tests for us on the semen samples. So what you'll see on the website is, depending on the time when the donor was actively donating in the program, his testing may vary based on what was required and what technology existed at that time. But all of the testing that we do it meets all of the FDA, New York State, California State, and other regulatory bodies that we're certified or licensed by. Now, we also do really in-depth genetic screening. All of our donors have a karyotype. A karyotype is a chromosome analysis that is looking at the structural integrity of our chromosomes. This is an important test. It'll indicate things like translocations or deletions that would potentially be causative factors in diseases or in developmental abnormalities. All of our donors have had cystic fibrosis testing. Starting in January of 2017, we started doing gene sequencing for cystic fibrosis, but some of the older donors would have had at least 86 mutations completed. We do hemoglobin electrophoresis, which is a test on the hemoglobin that is looking for the presence of both hemoglobin S and C traits. So basically, we're looking for sickle cell and different thalassemias. So these are blood disorders that we are looking for. I mentioned, we do beta thal by gene sequencing, alpha thal by genotyping since 2015. We've been screening donors for spinal muscular atrophy, SMA. The tests are indicated on the medical profile. And since January of 2018, we've been doing expanded carrier screening through Semaphore. Semaphore is a fantastic testing lab that works through Mount Sinai, and they have this panel of over 283 diseases that are autosomal recessive, meaning that you need to have 2 copies to have an affected phenotype or to have actual disease presentation. We are doing that expanded carrier screening, and if you're interested or you have a specific reason for being interested in the expanded carrier screening, I'd like to recommend to you a previous webinar that was done by our genetic counselor, Suzanne Seitz. You can find that on our website, on our blog, and it's linked in both of those places. And Suzanne did a great job, and there's a great Q&A. If you go through that and you have additional questions, just chat in or call in, and our customer service team can connect you to the genetic counseling team if you have specific questions. So all of that information is then put together in another packet. The physical exam results, the infectious disease testing results, the genetic disease screening results, all of that's put together, comes back to us on the donor review committee. We examine it, we make a recommendation, and the medical director makes a final call on whether or not the donor is suitable for the program. We are incredibly exclusive in who we let into our donor program. We want to make sure that we're letting the highest quality, the best guys with the best samples into the program for you. So only about 1 in 200 of our initial applicants makes it through this entire screening process to join the program. So at this point, they have what we call approval to be a part of our donor program. The next step is to start collecting all of that additional information that you all need to help you to choose your perfect donor match. We get a lot of questions about, the information we collect, so I want to share a little bit with you here. We do verify their educational degree. We either get a copy of their transcripts or they give us a copy of their actual diplomas. And that information is updated. So for example, if they're currently a student, they update that information for us when, like, if they complete their degree, or they move on to a graduate program, or they complete a graduate program, so that we can update the profile. We collect all of that personal profile information about their family that they present, that they report to us. We collect childhood photos on all of our donors, and those are free on the website. Some of our donors have adult and lifetime photos that you can opt to purchase. All of our donors complete essays. That's a really good way to sort of get to know them, a little bit more personally. They talk about their likes, their dislikes, their experiences. We do a personality type test that you can also see on in their profile, and we complete an audio interview where the staff sits down and does about a half-hour interview that we then can, put together. Well, I would say it's 15 to 30 minutes of an interview, of a conversation where the staff is talking to the donor, asking them their motivation for donating. It's basically to collect information so that you all can get to know their personality a little bit better. Things like, what's your favorite book, or a favorite vacation you took, or how did you like to spend your time as a child, things like that. And some of the donors give really thoughtful, kind answers about, why they've decided to donate, and or, a message for their, potential offspring. So the audio interviews are available. We do have free audio clips as well as a staff audio clip. So the staff audio clips are short clips of our staff talking about the donor, just again to give you a sense of their personality. So all of that information is collected. This is all sort of part of that screening process. This is all happening after they get their approval, but before they're ever presented to you all online on the donor catalog. The big thing that the donors used to have to make a decision about was whether they were going to participate as ID or non-ID. But starting in 2020, all of our new program donors are coming in and signing the ID donor agreement. And I just want to go over this in a little bit of detail for you, because this is part of the process. Before they get their final approval, they make this decision. They used to make this decision, and now it is discussed with them in detail at their medical interview. But this affects you all in terms of your purchase. For an ID donor, the cryobank is going to release contact information to registered donor-conceived individuals that are 18 or older. We're not going to release contact information or identifying information to you as the recipient. It would only be to your child once they reach the age of 18 or older. Non-ID donors did not agree to allow us to release that information to you. Now, we do have an exception. We have a program now that does allow previous donors who are non-ID to request that the cryobank release their contact information to donor-conceived individuals who are 18 or older. In order to do this, they contact the cryobank, they contact us, we give them a controlled form, they have to get it completed, and they complete it and get it notarized and send it back to us. And then that information is indicated on the donor summary profile, that he is in fact willing to release the information. We don't change his category or anything in terms of donor type or donor category on the website, but the information is in there. The reason we did this is that there has been some change in legislation that requires this. requires that 90-day donors be allowed to opt into this. So that information is important for you all to know. And then I mentioned that we do ongoing donor screening and testing. So once the guy's in the program, he's getting infectious disease testing done at least every 90 days. And I say at least because oftentimes we're doing it every 30 days, because as most of you know, the donor sperm that we collect has to be screened initially with the infectious disease testing in the physical, and then it needs to remain in quarantine for a minimum of 6 months. At that point, we have additional infectious disease testing that we say clears the vials from quarantine and allows us to sell them to you all. So we will start doing it more frequently to clear that inventory to make it available for you. You know, they complete an eligibility screening questionnaire with every single donation. So every time they come in to donate, they're answering questionnaires about their social and medical health and history, ensuring their ongoing eligibility. We're doing that infectious disease testing. They're constantly updating their own health history, their family history, and any information that changes. And then even once the donors retire, we do additional blood testing to clear all of the rest of the inventory, but we also annually reach out to them to collect any updated information, because as is clear from this presentation, their medical history is a snapshot in time. When they apply to be a donor, let's say it's a 25-year-old donor and his parents are in their 40s and his grandparents are in their like 60s and 70s. A lot of people are still young, healthy, but that obviously is going to change over time. And so we like to collect that information. And I want to show you an example of this. So this is just a random donor on our website, donor 4300, little cutie. If you scroll all the way down to the bottom of his summary profile, and you'll see this for all of our donors, updates are down here. So you can see there were no updates to his personal information for most of his updates. And then this year he changed his occupation from working in a restaurant to doing research. So that's one example of an update. His own medical history hasn't changed. He hasn't had anything going on with him, but this is the important part. Here, his family medical history, he has updated over time. And this is relevant information for your future child's health history. You know, to know that the donor's maternal grandfather passed away at 84 of a heart attack, and paternal grandmother passed away at 85 of pneumonia. And then for the past couple of years, he hasn't had any changes, but maybe next year somebody else will have developed a condition or something. And that information is really important, and we work really hard to collect that from all of our retired donors. So again, this is in the summary profile at the very bottom of the summary profile for the donors. And each of the donors will have this. Obviously, if he's a newer donor or he's still actively donating, you're not going to see updates presented there. But over time, you'll see that they're coming up. So that's it. That's the donor screening and testing. The questionnaires are really detailed, and we do collect a lot of information, and we are doing ongoing screening and testing at least every 90 days, sometimes every 30 days. So let's just take another quick poll. After the presentation, how well do you think you understand our donor screening process now? Just take a moment and you can answer the poll. Great. Looks like the majority of you feel like you have a medium understanding, which is great. You've stepped up. And then about 30% of you consider yourself a pro now, and that's fantastic. Before we get into the Q&A, I do want to offer you all an exclusive savings. If you use the promo code screening webinar, you can get full unlimited access, which is saving almost $130. You can access for free through the end of July. And basically that gives you access to all of the profile information for all of the donors. And that'll help you to potentially find your perfect donor match. I am going to invite Morgan and Christy on now to go through the Q&A session.
Great. Yeah, we do have some good questions coming in. So just start with one of the first ones that came in. One question we have, Michelle, is how do you verify the health information that the applicant has supplied?
So we collect that information initially, as I mentioned, on that medical questionnaire online. And then when we sit down with them in the medical interview, we're verifying it with them. We do not get medical records for their family members. It's not, that's not something that we do because of HIPAA and, privacy concerns. But the donor's health history is indicative of their family history as well. So it is self-reported. I will give you an example of how thorough some of these donors are. I was in one of my first donor interviews when I first started. I was sitting down with a donor applicant and we were reviewing his medical application, and we got to his maternal grandmother. And I asked, is she doing well? Does she have any health problems? And he's like, I think I remember she started taking, hold on. He pulled out his cell phone and he called his mom. And he was like, Mom, what is grandma taking? What's that medicine? And got the information at that point. So some of these guys do really go to great lengths to get really specific information for us. It is self-reported. And so that is the information that we provide to them. We do make it 100% clear to the applicants that the information they're providing is critically important to the future offspring and why medical history is important. So we do believe they take it seriously. And the physical exam and all of the testing, especially the genetic testing, would help us to know if there was anything missing that we needed to supplement.
Another question related to testing and screening is if the vials run out and the donor comes back to donate, do they go through all of the testing, screening, and committee review again?
So if it's a reactivation, which means that the donor was in the program, vials sold out, and he is being reactivated for one specific client, he doesn't go through the donor review process again because he was already deemed eligible as a donor. He does have to be rescreened and retested. So if something in his medical history or testing status changed that would make him ineligible, he wouldn't be able to proceed. But if nothing changed that would make him ineligible, he doesn't have to be reapproved. He just has the screening questionnaires to complete, the blood testing and the physical exam, and every vial does have to remain in quarantine for the 6 months. We will sometimes restart a donor who, let's say, a recent example, we had a donor at one of our sites who only worked with us for about 3 months, and we typically like to have them in the program for at least 6 months to collect enough vials to meet the needs of all of our recipients to have children and siblings. But he was being transferred for his job. Well, it just so happened that he got transferred to a location where we had another lab, but he didn't get started right away. So about 6 or 7 months went by, so we restarted him. And in that case, we did a quick, sort of like a quick re-review because he was still eligible, but we had to redo all that screening and testing.
One person here is asking, where can you find out or how do you request the age of the donor at the time of a vial sample? Because they noticed that there's just a time frame filter, for example, 23 to 28, but they might be looking for something a bit more specific. They mentioned like 25 or older, for example.
Christy, can you comment on that on the website? We don't really allow for choosing the age.
That's correct. Hi, everybody, by the way. Yeah, so all we will provide is the age range, and that is on the search. That's something that you can see on the donor profile, in addition to when you're actually searching as well. But unfortunately, there wouldn't be anything more specific that we would provide than that range.
All right, here's another question about some of the testing that is done. They want to know if hematomacrosis carrier screening is done on all donors. Would it be best to watch another webinar that we suggested for this information?
So I would recommend, yes, absolutely, watch the expanded carrier screen webinar. But what you can do in the donor search is, if you have a specific condition that you are, looking to avoid, for example, hemochromatosis, you can actually search. If you go into the advanced search, you can choose genetic disorders to rule out donors that are carriers for that. Each donor also has, if you look on the right-hand side on the donor profile page, there is a genetic test acknowledgement form. You can see the genetic testing that each donor specifically had completed, because as I mentioned, depending on when they were in the program and the technology that was available at the time, the testing is variable. So there are some things that all of the donors have, and then there are other things that only some of them have. But you can absolutely look for that in the advanced search and see that in the testing summary.
Christy, this is a question for you. For the facial matching, is there an extra fee? Someone has a daughter from a previous relationship and they would like their second child to look similar to us.
Well, there's a couple different options. There is a face match feature that we offer on our search. It's free of charge, where you can upload a photo, and then you can get donors based on facial recognition that are similar. And I believe we talked about that a bit in our last webinar. I think, Michelle, you even did an example of that, if I remember correctly. You guys can look at that. That might not be the best if you're having a photo of a child. So in that case, there's also something that we offer, which is called a photo match. That's a paid service. It's $70. The form can be completed on our website, and you would choose some items that are important to you, like hair color, eye color, weight, height, that type of thing, as well as provide a photo of the individual you'd like us to match. And then we can give you a list of donors that look similar based on the photos that you provide. That option is a little bit more personalized, so a lot of our clients really like that one, because we actually have our staff going through the donors to find you the best match based on your photo.
So another question someone has here is, so if I want open ID, should I look at non-ID and then watch for the release? Should I also look at non-ID and watch for the release? Sorry.
I would recommend, if you definitely want an ID donor, start by looking for an ID donor. If that's incredibly important to you, then absolutely use that as one of your search criteria. If there's a non-ID donor that fits everything else that you want, take a look in that summary profile and see. I will tell you that the uptake of I don't want to say uptake, but the opt-in to release information has not been very high. We have had a couple non-ID donors that have gone through and gotten the form completed. We did just start this process in January. So over time, we are reaching out to the non-ID donors through the annual update process, but it hasn't been a high number of them. So again, if it is something that you really value, I would say use that as one of your criteria when you're looking for your donor. I wouldn't hold out hope that somebody's going to change their mind.
One question here says, how has COVID affected sperm donation visits and new applicants in the future?
That is a great question. So, this pandemic has affected all of us, and basically the screening we have, luckily, through our molecular infectious disease testing lab, we have a COVID RT-PCR diagnostic test available. We are doing screening questions for all of the applicants and donors to ask if they've had a known or suspected exposure. We are doing testing on the donors and on our staff, so we're being very safe. Right now, there's so little known about this virus because, as you know, it was just identified and has started to be characterized in the past year, and we're still learning a lot. It is not known now how long the virus may stay in somebody's system. There are some preliminary studies coming out of China, France, and Italy that are presenting data that they're not seeing virus in in the male reproductive tract long term. Other ones have identified it. Some people think it has to do with the intensity of the infection. So there's still a lot to learn. But the bottom line is the samples that are being collected are from screened and tested individuals who do not have COVID.
Getting a couple questions here in addition about birth limits and everything for donors and what that would be in the
Sure.
U.S.
Sure. So this is another really good question, and I'm gonna start by saying we rely on you all to report your births and your pregnancies and births to us at the cryobank. We need that information so that we can limit the donors. We have worked since 2008 to limit our donors to 25 families in the United States. And we use the term families instead of births because you may want to have multiple children from the same donor, so they're full siblings, but you only count as one family. It's really important, as I said, to report the births, your pregnancies and births to the cryobank so that we can stop distribution. When we have that report of 25 families, we're basically only going to distribute additional vials to those of you who reported a birth to us, so that if you want to have a sibling. Otherwise, we don't distribute to new recipients after that.
And okay, someone wants to know about after they reported a birth, how do they keep updated about the information on the donor? Do they keep access to the site afterwards?
The donor profiles are always going to be on the website, and you have access to all of that. The summary profile information, where updated information is presented, is free to download at any time for all of the donors.
Christy, here's a question for you. It says, I'm interested in a donor, but on his site there's no option to buy. It says he is still active, though. How often do people sell back sperm? Because I don't think he's going to be in the program again.
Great question. I would recommend that you reach out to client services because it will vary depending on the donor number, what the actual situation is. The donor might be active and might be expecting additional vials, but there might be a waiting list right now. So that's something our client services team can assist with. In regards to vials and storage, if vials are stored here with us and they never leave, we always offer a 50% buyback, and there's no time limit on that. So clients always have that option, and many clients do take advantage of it. So yes, it's definitely possible that in certain situations that could happen. If a donor has nothing available and is no longer actively donating, there's always a possibility that something could be returned, and then we could offer it to other clients. I would say the best thing, though, would be to reach out to client services about that particular donor so we can give you some more information and possibly get you on a waiting list.
And another question to follow up on that, another one person wants to know, how can you get a donor reactivated after they're retired?
That's a great question. It's available in certain situations. What I would also recommend is that person reach out to CS so we can get some information from them. There would have to be a reported birth on file, and then we can work with that client, provide them with some documentation to go over, and from there see if it could be a possibility. It is quite expensive because you are reactivating the donor for your use only, so you are responsible for everything that goes along with that. So I would say if that's something that somebody is interested in and they already have a child by the donor, reach out to our CS team and we can send them some paperwork to look over to see if that would be a good fit and even possible for them.
Mm-hmm. Okay, here's another question. Someone wants to know if the psychology test is the personality test.
No, they're two different things. So the personality test is more like, I don't know if anybody remembers the Myers-Briggs tests, like the EFTJ, or, you know, they give you this acronym that talks to you about your personality type, if you're extroverted or introverted, if you're thinking or feeling, judging or perceiving. That's the personality test. It gives you a summary of the type of person and of the donor's personality. The psych evaluation is the personality inventory assessment, or index, sorry. I think I mixed that up. Strike that and reverse it. It's personality assessment inventory. And that's an actual, you know, clinical psychology test that indicates psychopathologies.
So someone wants to know here, and this might be something that you can see in the genetics webinar. But if the children from the donor are born with a genetic disorder, are all people with that purchase that donor informed?
Yeah, so there's a lot about this in the genetics webinar, but I can answer that as well. So as long as the issue is reported to the cryobank, medical records are shared with our genetic counselor and the medical director. They do a complete and in-depth review of the condition and the cause. If it is in fact found to be something that comes from the donor, and or it's an unknown cause but could potentially be coming from the donor, anybody who purchased is notified of the increased incidence or increased risk for that condition. So there's a notification process that happens via email and or mail and or calls, and it goes to physicians at the clinics to whom we've shipped and to the purchasers to notify people. But again, this is why it's so important to stay in touch with the cryobank, not just to report pregnancies and births, but to report any issues or diagnoses that happen in your children.
One person here says, this isn't really specific to donor information, but they want to understand why some donors show up on the U.S. English donor search, but not on the Canadian donor search, and what is the difference? Yeah,
so basically different countries have different regulatory requirements. And in the past, Canada had some very specific testing requirements that differed from what the FDA required. So not all of the donors were screened and tested for the specific tests that were required by Health Canada. Those regulations have now changed starting in February. And so over time, you're going to see that many more donors are going to qualify to be distributed in Canada. We just have to get through that quarantine period. So it has either to do with the consents that the donor signed or specific testing requirements that are in place in different areas.
Mm-hmm. Here's one question we always get on these webinars. How many vials do you recommend buying for one pregnancy? And then what about if you want to have a sibling in the future?
Christy, you want to take that one?
Yeah, definitely. I was waiting to see. Usually I see on average is that most clients, based on the recommendation of their physician, will order between 1 and 2 vials per procedure. That's an average. Some clients do more. And then, I'm sorry, Morgan, you said the other part of the question was future siblings?
Yep. Mm-hmm. From the same donor, yeah.
Okay, yeah. So we can never guarantee availability at any time for any donor. So the only way to guarantee you have the availability is that you purchase the vials up front if you're able to do so. You can store them here with us. We can, as we talked about a little bit earlier, we can keep them here for you as long as needed. And then if you end up not needing all of them in the future, you do have that insurance policy of being able to return them back to us for 50% of the original purchase price. I talk to clients all the time who unfortunately will come back to us several years later looking to get that second pregnancy started, and unfortunately the donor is just no longer in the program and there's nothing left, and those calls are always really sad. So if you have the means, we would always recommend to purchase whatever you think you might need up front and just keep it here with us, and that way and are assured that you'll have the vials for when you're ready to use them.
I'll just add to supplement what Christy said, that you should really follow the advice of your medical provider. If you're doing an at-home insemination, you're going to use 1 ICI vial to do your insemination, or 2 ICI ART or IUI ART. But if you're doing an IUI in the office with the doctor, the average person with no known fertility issues who is under 35 has, about an 18% chance, 15 to 18% chance of getting pregnant per cycle with an IUI in the medical health provider's hands. So I would never assume it's going to be 1 vial and you're going to get pregnant, because there's so many factors that contribute to a successful pregnancy. And just as an aside, that number is very similar to what the chance of pregnancy is each cycle through, traditional intercourse. So I would recommend, as Christy said, 1 to 2 vials per insemination. But if you, discuss this with your medical provider, they may recommend that to you that they would anticipate it's going to take 3 to 4 cycles to get pregnant. Or, if you want to have siblings, try to buy a couple of extra vials just to secure that for your future.
We have a couple of questions about if the donor happens to pass away prior to the kid turning 18. Is this something that the child can find out after they're 18? Is Fairfax Cryobank notified? A couple of questions about that.
Yeah, so, if we are aware of it, that we would inform them. Like if we were aware of it and it came to our attention, or somebody updated that information for us, like a spouse or somebody, because we have been around since 1985. So, I'm sorry, 1986. So some of our donors are getting a little bit older at this point. If that happens, we would update that summary profile as well. But when a donor conceived individual were to contact us, we would give them all of the identifying information and also let them know that the donor had passed away. Yes, we would reveal that information upon request.
Okay, here's another question about donor screening here. Do we screen for sexual behavior? For example, men who have sex with other men, homosexual men, etc.
Okay, so the short answer is yes. The long answer is this is a really frustrating question, because not from you all, but frustrating because the FDA does restrict and deem men who have had sex with men in the past 5 years ineligible to participate as sperm donors. And it's infuriating because they made some steps and some progress when they changed the blood donor regulation to only 1 year, but they did not include gamete donors at that time. As an aside, I have historically tried to reach out to various government officials and to the Human Rights Campaign to see if there's any, lobbying or anything happening to change that. Unfortunately, it was sort of a lower priority item. So the short answer is yes, we do screen for all of those questions that are required by the FDA. And the longer answer is that it's frustrating because we do have to deem those applicants as ineligible.
Mm-hmm. A few questions here about some of the donor products we offer. One person wants to know why adult photos require us to, or for them to pay. And then also they want to know if we would ever consider doing video interviews of the donor.
Christy, do you want to talk about the adult and lifetime photos, and then I can answer the next part?
Yeah, definitely. So we offer 2 different options. Now, not all of our donors will have the photo available. You'll be able to tell on the search which donors will have an adult photo based on a camera icon that you see there. All of our donors will have a childhood photo. But about a third, I think the last time I checked, about a third of the donors will have an adult photo available, either just one adult and childhood set, which is called the adult childhood photo set, or some of the donors have provided a whole series of photos, usually from infancy to adulthood, and that set can also be available, and you'll see both options on the donor search page. These items can be purchased individually or as part of a package. So everybody, I would highly recommend they take advantage of the promo code that we're offering. That's for the full access plan. So that will give you access to view every adult photo that's available for every donor that has it.
I think the other part of it was, why do you have to pay for that and you don't pay for everything else?
I think their next part of the question was about videos of the donor. Is that something we would ever consider?
Sure. So for the videos, we have talked about it. It's not something we've done, but it's something that we consider. And if it's something that a lot of people are really interested in, and you all chat in and keep asking about it, we may be able to move to doing that. But at this time, we're not considering doing that.
Someone wants to know if we sell vials internationally, for example, to Europe, and if there's a limitation on the number of vials to be sold overseas. Does it depend on the regulation in that particular country?
Yes, I would highly recommend all of our international clients to reach out to our global team by email with any specific questions that they have. Our email address is global@fairfaxcryobank.com. And based on the country you're trying to ship to, we can assist you. Every country is a little bit different, but we do have a limitation just in general for outside the U.S., which would be 15 families, different than our within the U.S., which is the 25.
Mm-hmm.
But that is dependent on what the local regulation is in that country. So
right. That's like just a general, but again, different countries have very different regulations. So just reach out to the global team, and we can, definitely walk you through that.
Christy is part of the global team. Little shout out for Christy, and she does an incredible job. So
you'll be talking to me.
Yes.
Another question here says, will you update the HIV testing to include antigens?
We're currently doing what the FDA is requiring, and I don't anticipate doing the antigen because we're doing not only the antibody, but also the DNA testing. So there's not really a reason to include the antigen testing as well.
One person wants to know about CMV. If they are CMV positive, should I do a search for CMV positive donors only, or can I also search negative as well?
Yeah, this comes up a lot, and again, I'm going to defer to your medical health provider. We work with a lot of different clinics and physicians and midwives, and everybody has a little bit different of a recommendation. If you yourself are CMV positive, it doesn't matter if you use a CMV positive or negative donor. If you test as CMV negative, some physicians will recommend that you purchase a CMV negative donor. But what I will say is all of our donors have CMV testing. So we're doing CMV total antibody, and then also doing the NAT testing on the actual semen to ensure there is no active virus. To my knowledge, and I actually just did a family building seminar with a reproductive endocrinologist at RMA who was talking about this. To our knowledge, there has not been a case of CMV transmission via frozen donor sperm. So if you want to be super, super safe, because you can never say never, right? When you're talking about medicine, you don't ever want to say 100%. But to be super safe, I would say if you're CMV negative, yes, you can start by looking for a CMV negative donor, but talk to your medical provider. They may tell you that it's okay to use the CMV positive donor. And like I said, we do the CMV total antibody. If it comes back positive, we reflex to the IgG and IgM. Basically, IgG is an indicator of a past infection. So a CMV positive donor has a positive IgG, which means they've been previously exposed. IgM is indicative of an active infection. And at that point, the donor would be deferred until he cleared the infection, and all affected samples would be discarded. So the samples are safe, but again, go with your medical provider's recommendation.
Here's a question. It says, if a male is listed as 46XY karyotype, does that mean he is quote unquote normal? Why don't some of the donors have that listed?
All of the donors should have that listed. We all have 23 pairs or 23 pairs of chromosomes, so for a total of 46 plus the sex chromosome. So 46XY is a normal male karyotype, and all of our donors have a karyotype. I'm not sure what you're seeing. If there's a question about a specific donor, please do let CS know, and they can let me and the genetic counselor know, and we can look into it. But I'm pretty sure that all of them would have that same testing listed.
We are seeing a couple questions asking about, how often and how frequently new donors are launched. Can you give them some explanation on how that happens, or the timeline on things?
Yeah, sure. So we're constantly recruiting and screening donors at all 6 of our sites. And so we constantly have new guys starting and old guys retiring, and it's like a constant ebb and flow. And we don't add a donor to the catalog until he's ready to release vials from until he releases vials from quarantine, and we have all of that profile information put together and presented. As you can imagine, it takes a lot of work to put all of this together. It's being collected. There are multiple people working on this in this process, so it takes about 7 months from the time a guy starts in the program until we release him on the catalog. And they're just released in waves as inventory becomes available.
Mm-hmm. Someone wants to know here, I'm using frozen eggs with ICSI. As the sperm is going to be injected into the egg, does it matter what the motility number is?
So for ICSI or intracytoplasmic sperm injection, motility doesn't actually really matter because they're going to just pick a morphologically normal cell, a cell that looks healthy and has the right shape, and they're going to physically put that sperm into the egg using a pipette. So it's not like the sperm has to swim anywhere to get to it. So motility is not as important. And I would actually recommend, if you are definitely doing ICSI, to consider purchasing IUI or ICI ART preparation because they're a little bit less expensive. The reason they're less expensive is that there are fewer total motile sperm present in the vial. These vials are created specifically for ART procedures like ICSI and IVF. So you may be able to save a little bit of money.
Someone wants to know, when I do an advanced donor search, I get donors who have criteria that I did not specifically choose, such as different racial background, height, etc. How can I better search for exact to close matches?
Well, I would always recommend that when clients are starting the search process, if you have too many things, it can get overwhelming, too many different items that you're searching by. So I would always recommend that you start with the most important, smaller pool of information that are just non-negotiables, putting those into the search. And then from there, if you're not getting enough or you're not really seeing what you want, to add things in. I will note that on the search, you will get partial results and the exact results. So you can actually toggle between those. When you're on the search, it'll say partial or I believe full. So you want to click on both of those. You might be actually looking at the partial. So some of those donors might have something that you were looking for, but not everything. So that's something just to look at. But I would always say, just in general, start small and then go from there.
Yeah, that's a really good point, Christy. And the other thing to note is when you do a search, you are also going to see at the bottom of that search page, like once you click on a donor that you think you might like, you're going to see at the bottom recommended donors that are similar but don't necessarily have all the same exclusion criteria, but they may be similar enough that we thought you might like them. So take a look at those as well.
So we do have a ton of questions coming in still. I apologize to everyone who sent them in. A lot of great questions still remaining on here. So I think we have time for one more question. Someone was asking if this will be recorded and emailed out afterwards.
Yes, we are. This whole thing, including the Q&A, is being recorded. Anybody who's a registered for the webinar will receive this. We also have been posting on our blog and on the website.
Sorry, you cut out there, Michelle. I think you said you talked about putting these rest of the questions into a blog post.
Oh, sorry. Yeah. So any of the questions that I didn't actually say that. Thank you for reminding me. Any of the questions that we didn't get to today that you all have submitted, Christy and I will go through them and answer them, and Alexis will put them on the blog for you all to review.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Exactly. Yeah. Thank you, everyone, for putting your questions, and I'm sorry that we couldn't get to all of them.
Yeah, thank you all for attending today. Really, it was good to have everybody on and to have your questions. And keep paying attention to the eBlast. We'll be announcing our next webinar. Thank you, everyone, and have a great day.